The air in the forest was thick with the weight of silence. It pressed in from all sides, a stillness that seemed to hold its breath, waiting for something to happen. The towering trees stood like ancient sentinels, their thick trunks gnarled and weathered by years of unbroken seasons. A few scattered beams of weak sunlight filtered through the dense canopy, casting fragmented patterns on the forest floor. The ground, damp from a recent rain, was soft beneath foot, making each step sink ever so slightly into the earth. In the distance, the faint rustle of leaves stirred, but it was too far to tell what had caused it. A squirrel, a bird, or something larger, something more dangerous? It was hard to say. This part of the forest was far from the paths of human life, and the creatures who roamed here were as old as the land itself, unbothered by the passing of time. The trees whispered with the wind, but the usual chirp of birds or scurrying of small animals seemed unnervingly absent. It was a rare stillness, one that felt wrong, as if the balance of the forest was about to shift. Every now and then a shadow flickered through the leaves, but nothing came into clear view. Deep within this secluded realm, a large gray wolf prowled through the underbrush. His eyes were narrowed, scanning the environment with a calculating focus. The fur along his spine bristled, the usual confidence of a predator tempered by something else, an unease that had begun to settle in his chest. His territory had always been safe, always been his, but today something felt different. There was a shift in the air, a tension in the trees that he couldn't quite name. He stopped suddenly, lowering his head to the ground, his nose twitching as he sniffed the earth. The scent was faint but unmistakable. Another wolf, a rival. The wolf growled low, his breath a soft hiss through bared teeth. This part of the forest was his. The boundaries had been clear for months, for seasons, but now something threatened that stability. His territory was being encroached upon. With the precision of a seasoned hunter, the wolf moved through the undergrowth, his muscles rippling beneath his thick coat. His paws left little trace on the damp ground as he moved, the silence of his approach betraying his lethal intent. He followed the scent trail, drawn deeper into the forest, towards a darker, less familiar part of the woods. The sun had begun to dip below the horizon, and the forest was slowly swallowed by shadows. The wolf's steps quickened as the scent became stronger, more pungent. He could hear the faint snap of twigs underfoot, the slight shuffle of movement in the dense underbrush. Another wolf, or perhaps more, was close now. He moved faster, his pace relentless until he broke into a clearing. At the far side, a massive silhouette loomed. A rival pack leader. The wolf's hackles rose, his teeth flashing in a silent snarl. The rival wolf stood tall, its fur a darker shade of gray, its eyes glowing like twin embers in the dim light. The two beasts locked eyes, each calculating, each waiting for the other to make a move. Then, as if on cue, a howl echoed through the forest. It was distant at first, a single mournful note that sent a shiver through the air. The wolf's ears flicked back, his focus shifting briefly. The rival, sensing the distraction, took a step forward. But it was not the rival wolf who was approaching, it was something else entirely. From the shadows beyond the clearing, a low growl rumbled. The forest seemed to hold its breath as the earth seemed to shift beneath the weight of something much larger. The first wolf stood motionless, his body tense with uncertainty. It was a bear, a massive grizzly bear, its fur matted with dirt and leaves, its eyes gleaming with hunger. The bear stepped forward with an unsettling, slow deliberation, its size alone enough to shift the balance of power in the forest. The rival wolf, seeing the bear, did not hesitate. It turned and fled, vanishing into the thick woods. But the lone gray wolf remained still, his instincts fighting against the overwhelming urge to retreat. He couldn't leave, not with the threat so close. His territory was his to defend, even if it meant facing an adversary far beyond his strength. The bear's growl grew louder, a deep, guttural sound that vibrated through the ground. It was slowly closing the distance, its large paws leaving deep impressions in the soft earth. The wolf's eyes darted around, searching for an escape route, but the clearing was too open, too vulnerable. There was nowhere to hide. Then, just as the bear was nearly upon him, the ground beneath the wolf's paws shifted. A sudden movement, an unseen force, broke through the foliage to his left. A flash of gray and white, a blur of fur and claws. A second wolf, a large muscular alpha, emerged from the shadows, eyes locked on the bear with unyielding focus. The two wolves moved in sync, their bodies coordinating in perfect harmony. The bear stopped, confused by the sudden onslaught. It roared in frustration, swinging its massive paw in an arc toward the two wolves. But the wolves were faster. They were smaller, quicker, and more agile. The second wolf darted between the bear's swings, nipping at its legs, distracting it, drawing its attention away from the first wolf. The first wolf lunged, snapping at the bear's throat with incredible force. The bear recoiled, staggering back, momentarily stunned by the onslaught. The wolves took advantage of the moment, circling the bear, their movements fluid and precise. The first wolf had learned from countless battles. He knew the bear was powerful, but it was not invincible. The bear's size was a disadvantage in the dense forest. It was too slow to match the wolves' agility. For what seemed like an eternity, the battle raged. The wolf's strategy was one of attrition, wearing the bear down with quick, sharp stripes while avoiding its deadly swipes. The bear, confused and enraged, could not keep up with the relentless pace. It lashed out in a frenzy, its movements becoming more erratic, until finally, with a final roar, it turned and fled, disappearing into the forest. The two wolves stood in the clearing, their chests heaving with exertion, their eyes scanning the shadows for any remaining threat. The forest was still once more, the tension in the air dissipating like a cloud after a storm. But the wolves knew that this moment of peace was fleeting. Their territory had been threatened, and though the battle had been won, the fight for dominance was far from over. As the night fell completely, the wolves retreated into the deeper woods, their eyes ever watchful, their ears alert to any new sounds. They knew the forest well, but they also knew that its balance could shift in an instant. Tomorrow might bring a new challenger, or perhaps an old one. But for now, the territory was theirs. And the tension of the forest, once thick and oppressive, was finally at rest. The air was cooler now, the forest settling into the deep quiet of night. The sounds of distant rustling, the calls of owls, and the shuffle of unseen creatures in the underbrush had returned. But something was different. An unease lingered beneath the familiar noises, a subtle warning that the wolves could not ignore. The first wolf, the gray one, moved through the dense underbrush, his muscles still taut from the encounter. His senses remained sharp, aware of every rustle, every shift in the air. The second wolf, the alpha, walked just behind, the faintest trace of blood staining his fur from the battle. Their eyes met occasionally, a silent acknowledgement of the victory they had claimed, yet neither of them relaxed. Not yet. The moon, heavy and full, bathed the forest in silver light, illuminating the thick canopy above and casting long shadows beneath. As they ventured deeper into the heart of the woods, the path became more treacherous, roots and rocks scattered across the forest floor, branches twisted into knots, and the ever-encroaching fog began to creep in from the distant hills. The tension was palpable, like a warning that hung in the air, thickening with every step. The wolves had seen many things in this forest. Rivals, predators, storms. But there was something else tonight. Something that gnawed at the edge of their instincts. Something was watching them. A soft rustle, too deliberate to be the wind, drew their attention. The gray wolf froze, his head raised, ears flicking back. The alpha followed his gaze. For a moment there was nothing, just the shadows, deep and still, then the faintest movement, just a flicker at the edge of their vision. They both tensed, their bodies instinctively going into a defensive stance. But there was nothing. The forest had a way of playing tricks on the mind, especially at night. They continued, their steps quieter now, more cautious. The fog thickened as they moved, curling around the trees like an ancient serpent. Every sound seemed amplified in the stillness. The soft crunch of leaves beneath their paws, the occasional snap of twigs in the distance, and the beating of their own hearts, loud and rhythmic. The alpha wolf stopped, his body rigid. The gray wolf looked at him, unsure, his fur prickling. There it was again. A noise, faint but unmistakable. A low, guttural growl. It didn't come from the forest floor. It came from above. Before the wolves could react, the trees around them seemed to shift. The canopy parted with unnatural speed, as if some hidden force was parting the branches. A massive figure loomed overhead, silhouetted against the moonlit sky. Its eyes glowed in eerie amber, piercing through the fog, and its silhouette was large enough to block out the moon's light. It was not a bear. It was a creature of the forest, ancient and unknown. Its fur was a deep, shadowy black, blending perfectly with the darkness around it. Its claws were long and sharp, like the branches of the trees themselves, and its fangs gleamed in the moonlight. Its body was massive, easily twice the size of the largest wolf, and its presence felt unnatural, like a predator that didn't belong in this world. The two wolves recoiled instinctively, their teeth bared, but they knew this creature was not something they could face. The forest had a way of breeding strange, unfathomable beasts, creatures that roamed outside the natural order, predatory spirits that twisted the forest's balance. This was one of them, and it had come to reclaim what was once its own. The creature's growl reverberated through the trees, a deep, vibrating sound that sent a shudder through the wolf's bones. The gray wolf's muscles locked, his every instinct screaming at him to run, but his paws remained rooted in place. The alpha wolf seemed to make a decision in that instant. Without hesitation, he darted forward, leaping through the fog with startling speed, and the gray wolf followed. They ran. The forest around them twisted and contorted, the path seeming to disappear beneath their feet. The air grew colder, the trees closing in as if trying to trap them. The creature above them moved with terrifying speed, a shadow in pursuit. Too fast to outrun, too powerful to evade. The wolves weaved through the dense underbrush, their breaths coming in sharp, panicked gasps. In the distance, the howl of the first wolf, the one who had signaled the beginning of this chase, echoed through the trees. It was not the triumphant cry of victory, but the desperate call of a wolf in danger. The gray wolf's heart raced, his pulse quickening, with the realization that there was no escaping this creature, no way to outpace it. Ahead, the forest began to thin. The wolves had reached the edge of the clearing where they had encountered the bear earlier. The fog seemed to dissipate here, and the moonlight shone bright, revealing a sudden stillness that took the wolves by surprise. The ground beneath their paws felt strangely solid, the air unnaturally quiet. But the creature was close, its growls reverberating through the trees, drowning out everything else. The gray wolf's thoughts scrambled. The clearing should have been safe, but something was different. His heart skipped when his gaze fell on the far side of the clearing. There, nestled at the base of a large oak tree, was a large rock. One that wasn't there before. In an instant, it clicked. It wasn't a rock. It was a body, a wolf's body. The gray wolf recognized the familiar fur. The same shade of gray. The same markings. It was the body of the first wolf. The one that had fallen to the creature's attack earlier. The revelation was horrifying, but not the most frightening part. As the gray wolf stared in shock, he saw it. The creature, the shadow, had stopped. It stood perfectly still at the edge of the clearing, watching the two wolves with eyes that burned like fire in the dark. Its growls had ceased. Instead, it was waiting for something. And then the trees moved. From behind the large oak, more shadows emerged. Figures more than just wolves, more than just beasts. The creature's pack. The pack it had summoned from the depths of the woods. There were no more choices, no more escapes. And in that moment, the gray wolf understood. The forest was no longer his, it never had been. The realization struck the gray wolf like a heavy blow. There was no escape, no retreat, no safe haven within the forest he had once known so intimately. The land, the trees, the air, the creatures. It was all part of the ancient force that now watched them, a force that had laid dormant for far too long. And now it was waking, stretching its long-forgotten limbs, and the wolves were at its mercy. The clearing was no longer a place of refuge, it was a stage, set for a terrifying performance. The dark creature stood silent, its massive form motionless, as its pack gathered around, shifting in the shadows, their glowing eyes betraying their presence. The pack was not like any wolf pack the gray wolf had encountered before. These wolves, too, were larger, unnaturally so, leaner, with eyes that flickered like flames. And their movements were more like whispers than the pounding footsteps of living creatures. They were shadows given form, ghosts of the forest, summoned by the creature that now stood at the edge of the clearing. The gray wolf's heart pounded louder, louder than ever before. But it was not fear alone that gripped him now. It was the dawning understanding of his place in this world, in this territory. The old forces were reclaiming the land, and the balance he had once known had long since crumbled. The creature and its pack were not predators in the traditional sense. They were something older, something rooted in the very essence of the forest itself. And in that moment, the ground trembled beneath the wolf's paws. Not from the weight of the creatures. No, the earth seemed to stir with something darker, more primal. The trees around the clearing groaned as if remembering their ancient purpose. The wind picked up, swirling through the forest with a sharp, biting edge, carrying the scent of something foul, something ancient and dead. The gray wolf shifted, his body tense, his instincts screaming for action. The alpha stood beside him, still, but the lines of strain were clear across his form. This wasn't just a battle for survival. It was a battle for dominion over the land itself. Their pack would not win this fight, not with force alone. This creature and its shadows were not to be confronted in the traditional way. In the midst of the chaos that spiraled in his mind, the gray wolf's gaze shifted upward. The sky was no longer just a source of light. It had become a presence, a vast, endless space that seemed to loom over them. The full moon above cast its light like a spotlight, making the clearing seem unreal, dreamlike. But it was too late for dreams. The moonlight wasn't offering salvation. It was marking the final act of an ancient, inevitable cycle. A low, deep growl rumbled from the creature's chest. It wasn't a warning, not anymore. It was a command. The wolves shifted, their limbs rippling in the fog, forming a circle around the gray wolf and the alpha. The clearing now felt suffocating, as if the very air had turned to stone. The wolves could not move, not away, not forward. Every muscle in their bodies was locked in place, immobilized by the pressure of the unseen force.